All right, guys. Hey, thanks for joining me today. Joe Ailts is back, independent agronomist from Wisconsin, the researcher guy in the area. Joe, give a quick intro again of who you are, remind us who you are, and then we'll get into it.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me back, John. Hello, everybody. My name is Joe Ailts, as John mentioned, independent agronomist, live in Northwest Wisconsin. I've been doing this independent agronomy thing for 3 years. Absolutely love it. No corporate overlords telling Joe what to do on a daily basis. It's the best part of it. I mean, this is the true definition of freedom right here.
Yeah.
It is a tough grind, no doubt about it, but I take pleasure in helping farmers find more profit and productivity in my day-to-day job. I don't sell products. I don't want to sell products. My job is to help make farmers more productive and profitable.
Yeah, and Daryl can't see this. Darrell, he asked if you and Dan were ever coming up to do videos, and I said, absolutely not. And so this is going to be awkward when he sees this, and both of you guys have been here.
Yeah,
he's like,
here we
son
are.
of a buck.
Right. This is opportunity.
But, so, I'm kind of at a weird point, and I've been talking to a lot of other strip tillers and even some guys with cattle. We went from full broadcast to strip tilling. We've been doing some of our own fertility trials, trying to do that next step. We see these big changes, but now we're not quite sure where we're at. We're kind of stuck between these two worlds. What is your research or your expertise in that machine you got up there?
You're not alone in that one. This is a real challenge that I think needs to be dug into significantly. So here's my take on that. We know for a fact that there is an incredible amount of nutrient tied up in the soil profile. No doubt about it, right?
Yes.
The P and K that's down below our feet, numbers that we have a hard time quantifying because they're so large, right?
Yep.
So total nutrient digest test will tell us we've got thousands or tens of thousands of pounds of these nutrients.
Yep.
The $1 million question is, how do we tap into this reserve? And so there's outside the box thinkers like yourself who are saying, we're going to trust that, we're going to try to tap into that, we're going to reduce our applications of synthetic fertilizers to try to tap into that. I don't disagree that there is a way to do that. Here's where the challenge lies. Again, back to the $1 million question is, knowing this nutrient's below our feet, what is the keys that unlocks this nutrient? We can't just go willy-nilly, cut out all the fertilizer and expect the crops are going to figure out how to do that on their own. Now,
right.
Nature's designed as a great system. They will figure out a way to do some of that.
Yep.
Right. But
we still have to make a living at this transition.
Right.
Yep.
Yes. And us as humans, interventionist farmers, ultimately we want to know numbers behind this. What do we got to do?
Yes.
How much we getting out of the system? What do we got to put back into it? So that's where my research is leading me, is knowing that biology is likely the key that unlocks these nutrients for us, microbes doing their things. The real challenge is figuring out how do we measure the right thing to understand what the biology is doing for us, right? So we got these.
That's more of a big question than a great answer. That's loaded.
I'd love to hand you the recipe for the best tasting cookies in the world. The problem is I don't know what ingredients need to go into the recipe. So we got to figure out ways that we can measure which microbes are doing the work and how much the work they're actually doing. Now, I think we're getting closer. We've got some great tests in the toolbox to get us closer to that, the Haney test being a great one.
That PFLA number, that's
PLFA,
the start of us being able
Yep.
to dial in biology?
That's right.
Okay.
Yes. So I guess the best way to capture that is it gets us to the ballpark. I don't know if it helps us find our seat. And
Okay.
that's where we're at with this, right? PLFA and Haney test get us to the ballpark. At least we've got to the game. We just don't know where we're sitting yet. And that's where we need to see technology evolve, because if we can identify the right bugs that are doing the right things for us, we can be more confident about saying, we can drop the DAP out of the program this year because we know we can tap into this reserve. Or let's pull out half the potash because we think the bugs can do some of that work on our behalf. I'm confident that we will get there at some point. I just don't know if we're there today in order to make those firm decisions.
Yeah.
That's where we're starting to struggle a bit.
Because the weird part, so P and K, we did the total digestible assay on a very tough field, and we're not going to soil health that field back to life. We can't resuscitate 9P40K to 50P 300K profitably in a couple years.
Exactly right.
We got to be realistic.
Sure.
So we did a total digestible assay on that field with them numbers, and even as poor as them numbers are, 9 and 40, that field on the assay came in at 600 and 1200 on P and K. So it gives you confidence it's there.
Sure.
Like you said, it's just a matter of tapping into it. Mm-hmm. So we've done the 9-year trial of phosphorus. That one seemed very easy to get away. So all the when as a farmer, you hear these people saying, well, the fallacy of phosphorus. Yep, after 9 years, that one was easy to prove. Then you studied under Richard Mulvaney, correct?
I did, yes.
That had to be fun.
It was.
Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Don't hang on.
Sure.
Now him, I can't quite get him to be correct yet, because potassium's a different animal in the soil. We've gone through several years of just that late June, July, and August when we really want potassium. We've been hitting these droughts, and the crops are showing potassium deficiencies. So it's kind of hard to pull back on potassium when it's a different animal.
Agree 100%. Yeah, so the potassium's a real bugger because, to my knowledge, in this biological space, I'm not aware of a set of microbes yet that they've identified that are specific at helping liberate more potassium from the soil profile.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where we'd like to see this technology evolve, right? There's new bugs coming to market every day. We expect at some point they're going to come to market with something that they think can help liberate more potassium from the soil profile.
Okay.
Yeah, when we run out of water, I mean, even the microbes take off their work. It's like, what are we doing? We just can't shove more potassium into the plant that way.
But wetting and drying of the clay releases potassium.
It does.
So if I had a field, the other year it had the failed barley crop on there, so it's basically green fallow for the year. So I was so excited for 23, like, with the legumes that were out there, like, this thing is going to be a monster corn crop. Look at a year of just mineralization.
Sure.
That field was a complete disaster of a corn crop in 23. The D4 drought and bad germination just took its toll. We got an environment here, we can't have any mistakes because we have no season to recover.
Yep.
So can I be optimistic that now that field has basically 2 years of almost a green fallow, we get some wetting going on and some mineralization in that soil because it's earthy. When you smell that, it's earthy, the bugs on them roots. So this has to be my year that I put some beans in there and just have record beans.
I'm pulling for you. I'm pulling for you.
But that field will be interesting to see what the P&K is doing with them couple years of unintentional fallow or just very poor crops, but the bugs don't know it was a poor crop.
Correct. As long as there's living roots underneath them,
yeah,
they're doing their thing, and that's what's important.
Yeah, and then so with the P and the K coming into 24, should a person fertility's local? Where does a person start if, because we can't just pull back in 24. You're going to set up for failure.
Correct.
Potentially.
Yeah.
So where does a person start with P&K in 24?
Sure. So I think what you've been doing on your channel, and I've been watching your videos, the thought process is spot on, is that on a field-by-field basis, know what your levels are with the soil test. There is some value in having to do that. There are ways that then we can trim back certain types of inputs based on what we understand on a field-by-field basis. That's the easiest, lowest-hanging fruit that I see. Have a look at your levels, know what you can get away with pulling back, if you can pull back, and then kind of go from there. I think that is... P&K can be challenging because we know the crops need that nutrient, right?
Yep.
And we don't have the lock and loaded solution to letting biology farm that out for us. We're
Yes.
still working on that, as we just got done describing.
Yep.
I think perhaps where there is more low-hanging fruit to be captured from a fertility side is on the nitrogen side of things.
Okay.
And so if I could convince you to switch the conversation from P&K into the nitrogen topic, boy, we could talk for hours on ways that I think we can capture some upside potential there.
Okay. Well, you're going to know this way better than me because I don't understand soil test and synergy. Was it the Mulder chart or something? The synergy and antagonistic?
Yeah.
I don't understand that well, but I've learned enough. So we had 2 foliar years where we saw amazing response on foliar feeds.
Sure.
So it leads me to believe that obviously there's more than just NPK. If I'm having a phosphorus problem, can a foliar program with a few pints of boron help me out? If I'm having a nitrogen problem, can a little bit of manganese or molybdenum, I don't know if I'm wording this correctly.
Sure.
You said low-hanging fruit. To me, taking some of my dollars from bulk in front of the planter, especially on nitrogen, is that true that we can, by fixing micros, we can
make the others more efficient?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do believe so.
Okay.
I think that's absolutely in play. And so as I mentioned about doing the soil testing, strongly encourage anyone that is doing the soil testing, make sure you run the entire panel. Don't exclude the micronutrients from the soil sample.
Okay.
Because we need to have an idea whether or not that some of these micronutrients might be the thing that's limiting your yield potential. You know, even though P and K might be somewhat on the low side, are they truly the factors that are limiting yield potential? You don't know if you don't measure these things.
Yeah.
So we got to measure them, right? My experience, having done thousands of soil samples up in this geography, is that most environments are low in the micronutrients unless they've been heavily manured.
Okay.
And I'm going to pick on manganese because I think that's the one that has the greatest opportunity for potential upside. Every soil I test, almost every soil I test, is showing low manganese levels.
Okay.
There's a lot of universities that tell you you don't need it, and there's not a crop response to be found. I disagree. When you see such low levels across the board in so many locations, you start to wonder whether or not there's missing something here. Is there an opportunity here to do something from a low-hanging fruit standpoint? Not surprisingly, in reading some of the agronomy summary books that have been published this winter, one of the highest ROI interventions that was studied last year was foliar manganese. And it just makes sense. You know, if you're testing low in manganese in your soil, the tissue test is showing low manganese, would it make sense to put some manganese on the crop? Just throwing it out there?
If our plant testing is saying that it needs manganese, I guess I'm feeding it what it needs. No.
And this sounds like no-brainer, no-dust stuff, right?
Yeah.
But I still run into an incredible number of circumstances where no one's measuring this. And therefore, if you're not measuring it, how the heck can we manage it? So I guess the moral of the story in this part of the conversation is at least start measuring some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Because it opens your eyes and you go, I never had thought about that piece before. And maybe there is some upside potential here. Maybe you don't need to put out hundreds of pounds of potash, because if a quick shot of manganese is what gets me to what I'm looking for, you know, that's a much more economical way to get there.
Okay. Nitrogen still. Let's not leave nitrogen. Let's not leave, because that's a bulk of our money.
Correct.
We can Haney test soils now for nitrogen levels with some degree of accuracy.
Yes, correct.
You got to play with that?
Yep.
What'd you think of that?
I think it's an incredible tool, and if it's deployed appropriately, can again get you into the ballpark much closer than any other system that I've found out there.
So we can bring nitrogen to a more managed level.
Yeah.
Corn residue, soybean residue.
Oh,
I know you're going to love this one.
You've opened the can of worms.
You've kind of done a lot of research on your own. I don't want to speak for you and say that you're not up against a wall, but there's no real research from the universities kind of confirming what you're finding.
Sure. I'll dive into this. Okay, so
I've been watching you on social media.
So I've got this issue that I take with the current way in which soybean credits are captured in our production systems. And if you look at what the universities state out there, they're saying the soybean nitrogen credit coming out of a soybean rotation into corn is usually somewhere between 0 and 40 pounds. Pick a number. It could be 20, it could be 30, it could be 40. Every state, every system has a slightly different number that they go about landing at this.
The old school thought was 1 pound per bushel, which would be contrary to production because better yield would consume more nitrogen of the plant.
One would think, yeah. Or it would leave more residue behind that has more nitrogen in it.
Oh,
but
touche.
Exactly. Before we get to that, however, most universities out there are telling us that the soybean nitrogen credit is actually the absence of a penalty in a corn-on-corn rotation.
Yes,
right.
We hear that all the time.
Because high carbon residue corn stover requires more nitrogen to find balance, and then that's what's necessary to break it down in a corn crop. Okay, I don't disagree that the part of the nitrogen credit is the absence of this corn-on-corn penalty. I agree with that sentiment.
Okay.
What I feel has been lost in this discussion, however, is that when you look at the stover left behind after a soybean harvest, after you've taken the grain out, there are crop removal apps out there that suggest there's over 74 pounds of nitrogen in a 60 bushel soybean crop after the grain has been removed. Okay, so let's pause for a second and consider that, because to me, 74 pounds of nitrogen sounds like a large number.
That's way more than we've ever been told.
Indeed. But yet we only take a 0, 20, 30, 40 pound soybean nitrogen credit.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not going to stand here and say that we should take a 74 pound nitrogen credit out of a soybean crop that yielded 60 bushels. That's not what I'm saying at all. All I'm simply asking is, if indeed we know that soybean residue decomposes and goes back into the system that ultimately becomes corn next year, was there not some soybean nitrogen left behind in that system that we should be accounting for?
Okay.
And so here's where I think Haney test can offer some opportunity. I also wonder if the cover crop biomass test could offer some opportunity. So bear with me as I walk through the system real quick. No one's ever done this stuff before, so we're kind of breaking new ground here, but I'm curious. I want to figure this out. Could we go out and sample a soybean crop before it's harvested, pluck the grain out, and run a cover crop biomass test to determine how much nitrogen's in the above ground biomass? I think we can. I will be doing this.
Explain the cover crop biomass test.
Yeah, sure. So a cover crop biomass test, very simply, you're going to go out and take a defined area of above ground biomass, measure what that defined area is, send it off to the lab. They're going to weigh it so they know how much matter's there. They're going to dry it out. They're going to run a full nutrient analysis on that. So what you get back in the report is a measurement of your total tonnage of biomass and the percent of nutrients in that total. So you can start doing some numbering and some maths on it, and you can calculate, you know, the pounds of nitrogen, the pounds of K, the pounds of P, and everything else that's in there.
Okay.
So it's a really cool tool. And in fact, this is what they recommend using if you're growing legume cover crops in front of corn as a way to hopefully put some nitrogen back into the system.
Yeah.
Okay, last check, soybeans a legume.
Yeah.
And one could potentially call it a cover crop that winter kills, even though you're harvesting it. So, right, I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't use one of these tests to measure how much nitrogen is in the above ground biomass.
Sure.
So that above ground biomass will decompose over the course of the season. It goes into the system. That nitrogen is in the soil somewhere, doing something. We just don't know how to quantify it. No one's tried to do this yet.
Is it tied up in the residue or the soil or both?
All the above.
Okay.
All the above. Because I challenge anyone right now, here we are, early part of March?
Yeah.
Walk out into your cornfields in this very warm winter we've had, your soybean fields, next year's cornfields, and tell me how much soybean residue do you see out there?
Yeah.
Are there any leaves?
No.
Where'd the leaves go?
Well, the ground.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so those leaves are a primary vehicle for storing nitrogen in a soybean plant. Okay, so if we assume that the leaves, the leaf stems, the petioles, the stalks, you can still see some soybean stalks out there, but eventually by the time you're into halfway through next year's corn season, all this stuff is gone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
My assumption is that there's a lot of nitrogen in that residue that no one has really figured out a way to accurately take credit for.
Okay.
So back to our central thesis here of what do we got to do in 24 to save a few nickels with low margin grain prices. I think doing a better job of figuring out how much nitrogen value is in that soybean residue is part of that equation.
Okay.
And I think we've got tools that we can use to at least get us in the ballpark. I mentioned the Haney test. There's one way we could go out before the corn is in the ground. We can measure how much nitrogen might be there.
Yeah.
Now, I know the haters will chime in here and say, well, with all the rain we've had, you've lost all that nitrogen. I think, okay, sure. I'm not going to disagree with that. There is some nitrogen that'll flush out of the system that may have come from those soybeans. But I'm guessing there's a bunch that's still there as well.
Well, no more has been lost from the soybeans than a bunch of anhydrous that have been put down last fall. Not to throw stones, but I mean, let's be honest. Nitrogen in Minnesota is a sensitive subject, so we need to do better with nitrogen around the world.
Sure.
And so, do you feel confident in a person pulling back a little pre-plant nitrogen, soil test, sap test? Manage it in season more because we don't need it until the end anyhow.
Sure. Yeah.
So depending on what tools we have.
As a blanket statement, my answer to your question is going to be yes.
Yep, correct.
And I know for some that sounds like blasphemy because we certainly can't limit the amount of nitrogen in a corn crop, can we? Not when we need these bushels to pay the bills. I take a slightly different perspective on that. I think there's way more nitrogen in the soil than we give it credit for.
Yeah.
I don't think we do a good job of crediting what we do credit for. And again, I'm guilty of this. I'm an agronomist that follows the rules of the system as much as I can, but I also like to question them. And so I think we can do a better job of measuring the ability of the soybean plant to provide some nitrogen we can credit for. I think we can do a better job of sampling before the crop goes in the ground to get a better sense of what's out there. And then fine tune nitrogen programs accordingly such that we're not leaving a whole bunch out there that was not needed in the first place. So ran across an interesting little factoid here recently. Apparently University of Wisconsin's been doing some corn on corn studies for a very long time. And they have found that it has plateaued, that they can grow 100 bushel corn in a continuous corn on corn system with 0 nitrogen units.
Really?
100 bushels, 0 N.
Yep.
Okay, so if this is true, and I haven't vetted this, so apologies if this is completely false. Take it with a grain of salt. However, if it's true that you can grow 100 bushel corn in a corn on corn system with 0 N units, doesn't that set a floor of some sort?
Yeah,
right?
Yep.
Okay,
yep.
So then let's walk through this logic too. Let's say we assume that it's 1 nitrogen unit for 1 bushel of expected yield. Let's say you want to grow 200 bushel corn, 200 units of nitrogen are going out there.
Yep.
Right? Rough math, back of the envelope here.
Yep.
Okay, so now let's go back to this. If you can grow 100 bushel corn on 0 N units, but guys are putting 200 out to get 200 bushels. See where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
Do we need that extra 100? I don't know. Every circumstance is different. Every soil type is different. So we just can't make blanket statements. But what I will say, this is what I will say with confidence, is that I think we can lean more towards less than more in order to maintain that yield potential.
And we're starting to hear some of that. John Kemp has been very vocal about we are potentially hurting our yields more with over applications of NPK than missing applications of micronutrients or other stuff. Mm-hmm. Would a stock test, a nitrate stock test after harvest, tell us how good our nitrogen program was?
I think too. Yeah, absolutely.
If we're wasting dollars or not?
You bet. Yep.
Okay.
So a stock nitrate test at the end of the season is a useful tool to get an idea of how well fed that crop was. I've seen them come back where there's over 2,500 parts per million nitrate in these stocks, which is so far off the chart. It's just
really?
Incredible. Oh yeah, it's wild how much extra nitrogen was out there. If you could couple that with a late season post-harvest nitrate soil test, now you've understood exactly what was left behind based on fertility programs. This is part of the fine-tuning of the dials, right? And it gets really interesting. As much as you can do these things after the fact and look in the rearview mirror, I say, why don't we look forward? Let's do more pre-plant nitrate testing, whether it's Haney or the pre-nitrate test. Likewise, we can come in before side dress and determine whether or not we need to put as much as we think we do. So this is fascinating. I did over 45 Haney tests last year, right before side dress application.
Yep.
Fascinating what this data showed. So I've got 45 different tests. The range of nitrate in the top 6 inches I found out there was something like 56 pounds on the low end, 56 units of nitrogen in the top 6 inches, all the way up to 240.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so let me ask you as a farmer. let's say I go out and I test your field before side dress, and I walk onto your farm and I hand you a lab report that says, Mr. Farmer, Mr. John, you have 240 units of nitrogen in the top 6 inches. Are you pulling out the side dress bar?
Absolutely not.
Okay, good. Good answer.
I'm going to the pond too.
Okay, let me ask the audience. Yeah, that's the right answer. Let me ask you, audience, if I walked onto your farm with a test that said you've got 240 units of nitrogen in the top 6 inches, are you pulling the side dress bar out? I guarantee you, when I give this presentation for the audience, most of the guys in the room are going to nod their head and say, yeah, we're still pulling out the side dress bar.
Correct.
Because that's what we do.
Correct.
Right. But we now have tools that allow us to get closer to what we think reality is and help us make some decisions on pulling some of it back. So I wouldn't necessarily fault the guy for saying, well, I still need to get out there and put some nitrogen because I don't know if it's going to rain, we're going to lose it, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
But do you need to put out the full dose? I mean, I don't think so.
I think most of them guys would say yes, even though you just showed them that out of fear. We've been so ingrained, we've spent our whole life doing that, that if you told, and that's where I'm at now. I talk to guys that we've been no-tilling through our rotations now for a number of years, and every spring we talk each other off this ledge because it's like, oh, this year, look at my no-till crops. And then come August, we're like, look at my no-till crop, And so you see the data right in front of you, but that change, this in between the ears is the biggest obstacle to ever overcome. Sure. And it is so hard. Like I said, with the fertility trials, it 9 pounds of potassium in foliar outperformed 100 pounds of potassium chloride in strip underneath the plant. Yep, the data's right in front of my face. I still don't believe it. I'm still like, I have to get that DAP in the ground.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Let me ask you a question. If they decided to start taxing nitrogen, would that change your perspective?
you, you, you cheeseheads, always picking a fight. Always picking a fight.
Yeah.
So we talk about that one? Minnesota.
Go ahead.
Minnesota is proposing a tax on nitrogen fertilizer. The bill is not passed yet. We're going to hear a lot of noise about this from farmers and farm advocate groups about how this is going to be detrimental to the farmers and this, that, and the other stuff. And it's the golf courses, it's the cabin owners, it's the municipalities dumping their sewage. The state has the numbers. Mm-hmm. Minnesota knows where fertilizer is going. There's 8 counties in eastern Minnesota or southwestern Minnesota. There's 8 counties that are under EPA emergency orders because of high nitrate levels in their water. This nitrogen or this tax. We're going to hear all this noise, how it's so difficult on farmers, but they're talking $1. $1. What's the average? A normal guy, several hundred tons of nitrogen a year, $700. It's not the dollar amount. That nitrogen tax, I think, is a clear and very loud shot across our bow of the state saying, we tried buffer laws. We tried reducing some anhydrous in some of these areas. We've tried this other stuff. That needle is not moving enough or fast enough. We're going to bring in this tax. Mm-hmm. They did have language in the bill, so it's still trying to get passed. There is language in there that if you are water quality certified, you get exempted. So with that, I say tax at 100 a ton. No, I'm just kidding. Whoa. Stop the presses. But when this $1 per ton does not move the needle, because again, if a guy buying 1,000 tons of nitrogen is covering a lot of acres, $1,000 when you're watching 1 million come and go, he don't care.
Yeah.
He's upset. What's next?
Yeah.
Is it going to be the $100 per ton tax? Is it going to be Chesapeake Bay regulations of nothing from November 1st to April 1st? Mm-hmm. Is it going to be, who knows? Where they go from here. Any farmer or any group advocating on behalf of farmers that is arguing this thing, I think this is an opportunity that they need to sit down and just be quiet. Because if we don't do something soon, it's going to get ugly real quick.
Sure.
We've known, I'm in the lower St. Croix watershed here. The river's right there. We've known, Minnesota's been saying for a long time, we got to do better. When you hear people talk about the Gulf Coast of Texas or that big coral reef off of Australia, that doesn't mean a lot to me because I can't comprehend it. I can't see it. It means nothing to me. Mm-hmm. When the river comes by my farm and Bob just down the road has dirty water, that means a lot to us because Bob can't use his well now because of my nitrates.
Sure.
That hits home hard, and I not to be preachy here, but this is a serious bill, and we need to start policing each other. I don't know how. I can't go to my neighbor and be like, "Hey, Bob, do you really need all that nitrogen out in front of your planter?"
You should try that.
Not with my neighbor. A few of them would actually listen, but I think we're back to a lot of unknowns. I don't blame the farmers. I blame the system that we've been maximizing yield for many decades now. But for the last couple decades, we've had a lot of scientists out there not getting much traction saying there's a better way to farm. Mm-hmm. No pun intended with Conklin, but you know, okay, pun intended with, let's see where this goes. Pun intended with Conklin, because they literally are trying to do a better way to farm, and everything that we're talking about, they've kind of implemented in a roundabout way or some direct ways of test your soil more often, test your plants, buy quality fertilizers, you know. We can do better, guys. I don't know where I'm going.
Well, I can take it from here. Sure. So I think you're spot on with what you start talking about in regards to regulations for nitrogen. And, you know, no matter what way any part. So here's my take on this whole regulations thing. We assume that there's going to be more state and federal regulations coming in telling us what we can and can't do with nitrogen.
Yep.
Fully expect that's going to happen over the next 5-10 years, maybe even sooner, who knows what.
Yeah.
So when I'm having conversations with farmers, the scenario I'm looking at is, you know, what do we do? What do we do when someone walks through that door and says, Mr. Farmer, guess what? You're only allowed to apply X% of your nitrogen relative to how you've done it in the past, right?
Yes.
You are now being told how to farm
Yep.
and have to do so on less input.
Yes.
So the questions are the conversations I want to try to have is all right, so if we figure this is coming, what can we do to preserve our yields, because you need the bushels to pay the bills,
Yep.
but do so without having to use all those inputs that they're now telling you can't use.
Yeah.
Right. So where's our opportunity then to find a way to do this that doesn't require the nitrogen use, because I told you you can't. I'm coming back to biology as the answer to that. I truly believe, and I think the industry agrees, that there are ways to use things designed by Mother Nature to capture more nitrogen that they're not going to penalize you for.
Yeah.
Right. So this is doing a better job at the soybean credit,
Because they can't penalize a nitrogen or an alfalfa crop.
Oh yeah, exactly. Right. And there's ways that we can use plants and microbes to supply nitrogen that we haven't exploited to their fullest potential. I get excited about that.
Yes.
I think we can dial in the soybean credit in a way to be more exact about it. What if that number is actually much higher than what we've done historically?
Right.
And that's entirely possible.
Yep.
Take decent soil that has good productivity. What if that 30 or 40 pounds that we've historically used is way out of line? What if it's way more than that? What if it's 50, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's 10 pounds, 20 pounds that were never accounted for.
Yep.
We still, to this day, as agronomists and farmers, do not take into account soil organic matter and its nitrogen mineralizing potential.
Nope. Have never gone to the co-op and had them say, well, look at your soil sample and you got this many N credits. It's how many bushels do you want?
Exactly. So it is fairly well established in the scientific literature that for every 1% organic matter, there's at least 25 pounds of nitrogen that you will get every single year. That's part of the natural cycle of things. I have yet to come across a circumstance where anyone has taken that credit. Those are extra nitrogen units out there that people just assume are probably there, but have never quantified and built into a nitrogen recommendation program.
So if you're on 5% organic matter, like the rest of Minnesota, you got 100 to 125 N credits just sitting there waiting?
Yes.
That are usable this year.
Yes.
Them lucky bucks.
Let that soak in for a minute. I don't. But find an agronomist or a farmer who's going to go, all right, we're putting our confidence in the soil organic matter to carry this crop, right? So fascinatingly, University of Illinois released some awesome studies on what happens to nitrogen when it's applied via fertilizer. This comes out of Mulvaney's camp again, out of University of Illinois. And they found that 60% of the nitrogen in a corn plant is taken up from the soil. 40% comes from the fertilizer.
Yeah.
And the way they know that, right, because they radio labeled the fertilizer, so they were able to track this using the Geiger counter or whatever they do in the lab to measure whether or not that stuff glows at night and gives off its radioactive signal.
Yeah.
So if we know that the corn plant is getting 60% of its nitrogen from the soil, where's that coming from? Who's crediting that? How do we take that number and put that into a fertility plan that allows us then to say we can leave some of that taxed nitrogen at the fertilizer store and rely more on what the soil's giving us? Again, I'm confident there are ways to do this. I don't have the exact answer, but I do believe that we can get better about crediting what nature's already given to us.
Yeah. So 2 thoughts on that. You're opening up another door. When the state is coming with regulations, the one saving grace is we get to use the same numbers that they get to use. So if they're testing our soil saying, well, you only get to buy this much nitrogen, at the same time, they've tested our soil to show us how much we already have. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter. So that'll be kind of a double-edged sword, or they're, silver lining kind of deal. Biology, you said the University of Wisconsin had the 100 bushel corn. Not to name drop again, but John Kempf, they used some of they had a grower do some research and just using several of their products with no manure, no plow down alfalfa, just use some of their products, got that soil just pumping. They were growing 200 bushel corn with no inputs other than a gallon of the Rejuvenate and some Sea Shield and them type of snake oil products. I don't know about you guys, but if I could grow 150 bushel corn with a sprayer pass in the fall and a couple gallons an acre and a couple in season at a couple gallons an acre, I would gladly do that versus haul the strip till around with tons of fertilizer at a time.
Sure. Great points.
And then Dave Brandt, his soil, that's where we're all striving. We'd all love to get soils like that. I mean, didn't he have like thousands and thousands of, his NP and K credits on his soil test? He could have grown, if that soil test was in Iowa, he could have been setting records without ever putting a nickel down.
That's right.
So it's there in front of us. We just have a long ways to go to get from east central Minnesota, icky loam, sand, to Dave Brandt.
Correct. Yes. But there's middle ground there. I have 2-3 nitrogen trials back in Wisconsin that are part of the state-funded grant program where they required us to do a 0 N rate across a number of strips.
Okay.
And so having harvested those trials last season, we averaged 130 bushel yield on 0 N rate strips.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
These were coming out of soybean.
Okay.
And so when you start to think about 130 bushel corn coming out of a soybean rotation, we think we can grow 100 bushel corn on corn.
Yeah.
We got an extra 30 bushels coming out of the soybean rotation. What's that number? Okay.
So
it got the wheels turning on
Yep.
how to think about the soybean credit different, but it also shows, to your point, that we can grow meaningful amounts of corn on 0 applied nitrogen.
Yeah.
The opportunity's there. And again, don't take away that Joe's telling you not to put nitrogen on your corn, please. I know how things work on the internet. However, it opens the door to a better conversation. How do we get better at this?
Yeah.
How do we figure out more ways to do this?
Yeah.
How little input can we use to maximize the output and preserve profitability?
Yeah, yep, I think that's a great point. And I'll follow this up to break down my theories for the year of how I'm going to manage the strip till, how I'm going to manage how to build my foliar program and in-season stuff. And we're going to live it out. We're going to do it this summer and see if it's good enough for Randy Dowdy, it's good enough for me.
Perfect. What a great way to end this.
All right, Joe.
Thank you much.
Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, a great 7 minutes of content, and awesome. And thank you guys for joining us, and hope you enjoy it. Leave your comments. See you next time.
Thank you.